Order! I said order, or I will clear this entire gallery." The gavel didn't just strike the sound block. It cracked like a gunshot, echoing off the high panelled walls of courtroom 4B. Judge Harrison Wycliffe leaned over his mahogany fortress, his face twisted in a sneer he didn't bother to hide. In the defendant's chair sat Terence Booker, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, his head bowed low. To the packed gallery, Terence looked like just another statistic. A black man with no money, no connections, and no hope. To Judge Wycliffe, he was prey. But what neither the judge nor the smug district attorney knew was that the man they were tormenting wasn't a helpless mechanic. The man in the shackles was Special Agent Terence Booker, and he wasn't there to be judged. He was there to drop the hammer. The air conditioning in the Tiburon County Courthouse had been broken since 1998, or at least that's how it felt. The air was thick, smelling of floor wax, stale coffee, and desperate sweat. District Attorney Clifford Banks adjusted his silk tie, pacing in front of the jury box like he owned the floorboards. He was a man who spent more on his haircuts than most people in the room spent on rent. He stopped, turning slowly to point a manicured finger at the defendant's table. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Banks began, his voice dripping with theatrical sorrow. "We live in a society of laws. Without them, we are animals. And what we have here," he gestured dismissively toward Terence, "is a blatant disregard for those laws. The defendant, Mr. Booker, didn't just steal from an auto shop. When confronted by a brave officer of the law, he chose violence." Terence Booker sat perfectly still. He kept his eyes on the scarred wood of the table. He had to play this perfectly. To the world, he was Terence Booker, a 34-year-old part-time mechanic with a spotty employment history and an address in the crumbling East Ward projects. He had to look defeated. He had to look scared. But under the cheap polyester suit coat, his heart rate was resting at a steady 60 beats per minute. "Mr. Booker," the voice boomed from above. Terence looked up. Judge Harrison Wycliffe was a massive man, his black robe straining at the shoulders. He had a face like a bulldog, heavy-jowled and perpetually red, with watery blue eyes that held a terrifying emptiness. Wycliffe was a legend in Tiburon County, but for all the wrong reasons. They called him the Hangman of the East Ward. If you were poor, and especially if you were black, entering Wycliffe's courtroom was considered a sentencing hearing, regardless of the evidence. "I saw you rolling your eyes, boy," Wycliffe said, his voice a low rumble. The courtroom went dead silent. The public defender, a young, frantic woman named Natalie Reed, shot up from her chair. "Objection, Your Honor." Natalie's voice cracked slightly, but she held her ground. "My client did no such thing, and referring to the defendant as boy is prejudicial and derogatory." Wycliffe didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Terence. "Overruled. Sit down, Ms. Reed, before I hold you in contempt for wasting my time. I know disrespect when I see it." Terence swallowed hard, forcing himself to look down again. Record it, he thought. Let it all go on the record. The tiny device sewn into the collar of his shirt was capturing every decibel. The operation, codenamed Blind Scale, had been running for 8 months. The FBI had received tip after tip about Tiburon County. People were disappearing into the prison system on fabricated charges, and their assets, cars, homes, savings, were being seized by the court and vanishing into shell companies. The common denominator was always Judge Wycliffe and D.A. Banks, but they were smart. They never left a paper trail. They needed to be caught in the act of framing someone they thought was a nobody. They needed a victim. Terence had volunteered. "The prosecution calls Officer Gary Miller to the stand," Banks announced. The doors at the back swung open, and Officer Miller walked in. He was thick-necked, with a buzz cut and a uniform that was too tight across the chest. He walked with a swagger that suggested he knew exactly how this script ended. Miller took the stand, swore on the Bible, and sat down, chewing gum. "Officer Miller," Banks smiled, "tell us what happened on the night of November 14th. Miller leaned into the microphone. "I was on patrol in the East Ward. I saw the suspect, Mr. Booker there, prying open the back door of Souls Auto. When I approached him, he turned and swung a tire iron at my head. I had to use necessary force to subdue him." A collective gasp went through the jury. It was a lie, a complete, total fabrication. Terence remembered the night vividly. He had been changing a tire on his own car, a beat-up sedan the Bureau had bought for him, on the side of the road. Miller had pulled up, turned off his body cam, and told Terence he fit the description. There was no Sal's Auto. There was no tire iron. Miller had pistol-whipped him, planted a bag of stolen catalytic converters in his trunk, and dragged him in. Terence touched the healing scar on his hairline. The headache was real. The anger was real, but the discipline was stronger. "He swung a tire iron," Banks repeated, feigning shock. "Did he say anything?" "Yeah," Miller smirked, looking directly at Terence. He said, "You cops can't touch me." Natalie Reed stood up again. "Objection. Hearsay. And where is this tire iron? It wasn't entered into evidence because it doesn't exist." "Sustained on the hearsay, but watch your tone, Counselor," Wycliffe grunted. He looked at the jury, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Though, we all know how these things go in the heat of the moment, don't we? Police put their lives on the line." It was subtle, but it was instructions to the jury. Believe the cop. Ignore the facts. Terence watched the jury. 12 people. Mostly white, middle-aged, looking tired. They looked at Miller with respect. They looked at Terence with fear. Wycliffe had engineered the selection process, dismissing anyone from the East Ward. Just wait, Terence thought, his hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Dig the hole deeper. By the time the afternoon recess hit, the narrative was set. According to the court, Terence Booker was a violent, erratic criminal who hated authority. Natalie Reed was pacing the small holding cell where Terence was being kept during the break. The room was a concrete box with a metal bench. "I don't understand it," Natalie said, running a hand through her frizzy hair. She looked exhausted. She was a good lawyer, perhaps the only honest one in the building, but she was drowning. "The body cam footage corrupted exactly when Miller engaged you. The dash cam was off for maintenance." "It's their word against yours, Terence. And Wycliffe, he's not even pretending to be impartial today." She sat down next to him, lowering her voice. "Look, they offered a plea deal just now, 5 years. Parole in 2. Terence looked up, his eyes sharp. "I didn't do it, Natalie." "I know you didn't," she whispered aggressively. "I believe you. The stolen parts in your trunk had serial numbers from a shop 3 towns over that got hit while you were allegedly at Sal's. It's physically impossible, but Wycliffe won't let me introduce the GPS data from your phone. He ruled it inadmissible due to lack of chain of custody. It's a set-up, Terence, a railroad job. If I take the plea," Terence said, testing her, "what happens? You go to prison, you lose your right to vote, you have a felony record, and—" She hesitated. "They seize your car, and since they are claiming you used your grandmother's house as storage for stolen goods, Banks filed a motion to seize the property under civil forfeiture laws." There it was, the kicker, the house. In his cover story, Terence lived with his elderly grandmother, Ma Booker, in a small, paid-off house on 4th Street. The house sat on a plot of land that a development company, owned silently by Judge Wycliffe's brother-in-law, was desperate to buy. "They want the house," Terence said quietly. "It looks that way," Natalie sighed. "If you're convicted, they take the deed. Your grandmother gets evicted. It's evil, Terence. But if you fight and lose, Wycliffe will give you 20 years. He'll make an example of you." Terence stood up and walked to the bars. He saw the bailiff down the hall, eating a sandwich. "We don't take the deal," Terence said. "Terence, please." "No deal," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the nervous quiver he had feigned in the courtroom. He turned to her, and for a second, Natalie saw something change in his face. The slouch disappeared, the jaw set like granite. He didn't look like a mechanic from the East Ward anymore. "Go back in there, Natalie. Fight like hell. Object to everything. Make them scream." Natalie blinked, confused by the sudden shift in his demeanor. Okay, I will. But you need to prepare yourself for the verdict." "I'm prepared," Terence said. When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. It was hotter, more hostile. Judge Wycliffe looked bored, checking his watch as if he had a tea time to catch. "Defense, call your first witness," Wycliffe yawned. "The defense calls Terence Booker," Natalie announced. A ripple went through the room. Defendants rarely took the stand in cases like this. It opened them up to cross-examination by sharks like Banks. Banks smiled. He licked his lips. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He was ready to tear Terence apart. Terence walked to the witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth. "Mr. Booker," Natalie started, trying to guide him gently. "Tell us where you were that night." "I was on Route 9, changing a tire," Terence said calmly. "I was returning from a job interview in the next county." "Did you have a tire iron?" "I had a lug wrench for the tire." "Did you threaten Officer Miller?" "No, ma'am. I kept my hands on the hood of the car as instructed." Natalie sat down, looking nervous. "Your witness?" Banks stood up slowly. He didn't walk to the podium. He walked right up to the witness box, invading Terence's space. "Mr. Booker," Banks sneered, "you say you were at a job interview, but you're unemployed, aren't you? You haven't paid taxes in 3 years." "I do odd jobs. Cash work." "Right. Cash work. Is that what we're calling fencing stolen car parts now?" Banks laughed, looking at the jury. They chuckled nervously. "I don't steal," Terence said. "You don't steal?" Banks leaned in, his face inches from Terence's. "Let's talk about your history, Mr. Booker. You were arrested 10 years ago for shoplifting, weren't you?" "I was 18. It was a candy bar. Charges were dropped." "A pattern of behavior," Banks shouted, spinning around. "A pattern of taking what isn't yours. You think the world owes you something, don't you?" "Objection," Natalie cried, badgering the witness. "Overruled." Wycliffe slammed the gavel. "Answer the question, boy." Terence looked at the judge. He held Wycliffe's gaze. "I think the world owes us truth, Your Honor." Wycliffe's face went purple. "You watch your mouth in my court. You are here because you are a criminal. You are here because people like you ruin this city." The mask was slipping. Wycliffe wasn't just biased. He was comfortable. He felt safe enough to say the quiet part out loud. "People like me?" Terence asked calmly. "Thugs," Wycliffe spat the word out. "Leeches. You come into my courtroom, waste the taxpayers' money, and lie to my face. Well, I've got a surprise for you, Mr. Booker. Justice in this county isn't blind. It sees right through you." "I agree," Terence said. "It sees everything." Banks scoffed. "No further questions. The prosecution rests." As Terence stepped down, he saw Wycliffe scribble something on a notepad. He wasn't taking notes. He was writing the sentence. The closing arguments were a blur. Natalie was passionate, pleading for reasonable doubt. Banks was arrogant, demanding law and order. The jury deliberated for only 40 minutes. When they came back, none of them looked at Terence. "Mr. Foreman," Wycliffe beamed, "have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The foreman, a heavy-set man who had glared at Terence all trial, stood up. "We find the defendant, Terence Booker, guilty on all counts." Natalie put her head in her hands. Wycliffe grinned, a terrible, predatory expression. "Excellent. The jury is dismissed." He waited for the door to close behind the last juror before turning his attention back to the defense table. "Mr. Booker, stand up." Terence stood. "I see no reason to delay sentencing," Wycliffe said, shuffling his papers. "I've seen enough of your kind to know that rehabilitation is a waste of resources. You are a danger to this community. And frankly, I'm going to make sure you never step foot in Tiburon County again." "Your Honor, we request a sentencing hearing," Natalie begged. "Denied!" Wycliffe roared. "I sentence you to 20 years in the state penitentiary, maximum security. And pursuant to the civil asset forfeiture filing, the property at 104 4th Street is hereby seized by the court to pay for the damages and legal fees incurred by the state." Wycliffe slammed the gavel down. "Bailiff, take him away." The bailiff, a burly man named Officer Davis, moved to grab Terence's arm. "Don't touch me," Terence said. It wasn't a request. The tone was so cold, so authoritative, that Officer Davis actually froze. "Excuse me?" Wycliffe laughed, disbelief coloring his face. "Add resisting arrest to the file. Drag him out." "I said..." Terence raised his voice, projecting from the diaphragm, filling the room with a command that shattered the stale air. "Do not touch me." Terence reached into his jacket pocket. "He's got a gun!" Banks shrieked, diving under the prosecution table. Officer Davis went for his holster. "FBI!" Terence shouted, whipping out not a gun, but a gold badge on a leather wallet. He held it high, the light catching the eagle crest. "Special Agent Terence Booker, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nobody moves." The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was the silence of a bomb having just gone off. Judge Wycliffe froze, his gavel hovering in mid-air. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face drained of color, turning from angry red to a sickly, pasty white. What is this?" Wycliffe stammered. "This is a court of law. You can't—" "Sit down, Harrison," Terence barked. He didn't call him Your Honor. He didn't call him Judge. At that exact moment, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't the public. It was a tactical team. 6 agents in FBI windbreakers, body armor and carrying rifles poured into the room, flanking the aisles. Behind them walked Assistant Director Sarah Halloway, a woman with steel-gray hair and a look that could cut glass. "Secure the exits," Halloway commanded. "Nobody leaves this room." D.A. Banks peeked his head out from under the table, trembling. Terence turned to the gallery, then back to the bench. He walked slowly toward the judge, the chains on his feet clinking on the floor, the only sound in the room. "Judge Harrison Wycliffe," Terence said, his voice calm, dangerous, and loud enough for the court reporter to hear. "You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, and judicial corruption." Wycliffe slumped back in his chair, the leather creaking loudly. You can't do this. I am a judge. I am the law in this county." Terence reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. He unlocked the cuffs on his wrists, the metal clattering onto the floor. He rubbed his wrists, looking Wycliffe dead in the eye. Not anymore. The silence in courtroom 4B didn't last. It shattered into a cacophony of shouting, shuffling boots, and the metallic click of safety latches disengaging. "This is a federal operation," Assistant Director Halloway announced, her voice cutting through the panic like a knife. "All court officers, stand down! Place your weapons on the floor, now!" Officer Davis, the bailiff who had been moments away from dragging Terence to a cell, looked from the red-faced Judge Wycliffe to the heavily armed FBI agents pointing automatic rifles at his chest. The math wasn't hard to do. He slowly unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop to the floor with a heavy thud, raising his hands. "Traitor!" Wycliffe screamed, slamming his fists onto the bench. "Davis, do your job. Get these people out of my courtroom. I am the supreme authority here." "Not today, Harrison," Terence said, stepping up onto the raised dais where the judge's bench sat. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a predator who had finally cornered his quarry. Terence leaned over the mahogany desk, invading the judge's sanctuary. "Harrison Wycliffe, you have the right to remain silent. Though given the 20,000 hours of audio we have on you, I doubt it matters what you say now." You wore a wire," Wycliffe gasped, clutching his chest. "In my chambers. That's illegal. That's privileged judicial conduct." "Not when you're discussing how to launder money through your brother-in-law's shell companies," Terence replied coldly. "We didn't just tap the courtroom, Harrison. We tapped your phone, your car, your country club locker. We even tapped the confession booth at St. Jude's. We know everything." While Terence cornered the judge, the chaos at the prosecution table was pitiful. District Attorney Clifford Banks, the man who had strutted like a peacock only an hour ago, was currently trying to crawl under the table to reach his briefcase. "Secure him," Halloway barked. Two agents hauled Banks up by the armpits. He was weeping, mascara running down his cheeks. Who knew the DA wore makeup? "I was forced!" Banks shrieked, his voice high and shrill. "It was Wycliffe. He made me do it. I have a family. I'll cut a deal. I can give you the names. I can give you the accounts." "Shut up, you spineless worm!" Wycliffe roared from the bench as agents moved in to cuff his hands behind his back. Terence turned to look at the jury box. The 12 jurors were pressed against the back wall, eyes wide with terror. They had just convicted a federal agent of a felony. They looked like they expected to be arrested next. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Terence said, his voice returning to a calm, professional baritone. "You can relax. You aren't under arrest. You were manipulated. The evidence you saw was fabricated. The testimony you heard was perjured. You were tools in a game rigged by the man sitting in that high chair." He pointed to Natalie Reed. The young public defender was standing frozen at her table, her mouth slightly open, staring at Terence as if he were a ghost. Terence walked down the steps and approached her. He signaled his team to give them space. "Natalie," he said softly. "You." She stammered, shaking her head. "You played me. This whole time, the tire iron, the job interview." "The interview was a cover," Terence admitted. "But the innocence was real. I didn't commit the crime, Natalie. And you defended me like I was your own brother. You're a hell of a lawyer." "I thought I was losing my mind," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I thought the system was broken beyond repair." "It is broken," Terence said, looking back at Wycliffe being dragged down the steps in his robes. "That's why we're here to burn it down and build it back up." "Agent Booker," Halloway called out. "We've secured the judge's chambers. Technicians are already pulling the hard drives. We found the ledger." The color drained from Wycliffe's face completely. "The ledger?" he whispered. "That's right." Terence smiled, a dark, satisfied smile. "The blue book, the one you keep in the false bottom of your golf bag safe, the one listing every bribe, every seized property, and every innocent man you sent to prison to cover your tracks." Wycliffe's knees buckled, The agents had to hold him up. "Get him out of here," Terence commanded. As they dragged Wycliffe past the gallery, the doors swung open again. But this time it wasn't police. It was the press. A swarm of cameras and reporters, alerted by the FBI just minutes before the raid, flooded the hallway. "Get that camera out of my face!" Wycliffe shouted, trying to hide his face with his shoulder, but the handcuffs made it impossible. The flashbulbs popped like lightning storms. The image of the hangman of the East Ward being hauled away in chains would be on the front page of every paper from Tiburon to New York City by morning. Terence watched them go, then turned to Officer Miller, the corrupt cop who had testified earlier. Miller was trying to blend into the wall near the exit. "Agent Ross," Terence said without looking. "Don't let Officer Miller leave. He has a date with a perjury charge and assault on a federal officer." Miller made a break for the door, but Agent Ross, a former linebacker, tackled him into the jury box railing with a bone-crunching thud. The courtroom was finally secure. But for Terence, the work wasn't done. The arrest was the easy part. The explanation, and the reckoning, was just beginning. 2 hours later, the courthouse was on lockdown. The FBI had commandeered Courtroom 4B as a temporary command post. The tables where Terence had sat as a defendant were now covered in laptops, tactical gear, and boxes of evidence seized from the DA's office downstairs. Assistant Director Halloway stood at the front of the room, reviewing a digital map of the county on a projector screen. Terence sat on the edge of the jury box, nursing a bottle of water. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a dull ache in his head where the stress had lived for 8 months. Natalie Reed was still there. She had refused to leave until she understood the scope of what she had been part of. Halloway had granted her clearance, mostly because Terence insisted. "So," Natalie said, looking at the map, "it wasn't just about targeting minorities. That was the mechanism, not the motive," Terence explained, standing up and walking over to the map. He pointed to a series of red pins clustered in the East Ward, the poorest district in the county. Racism was the tool Wycliffe used because it was effective. Nobody questions it when a young black man from the projects gets sent away. It's expected. It's invisible. "But why?" Natalie asked. "Look at the pins," Halloway interjected, tapping the screen. "Every single one of these red pins represents a defendant Wycliffe sentenced to maximum terms in the last 3 years. Over 200 people. Now look at this." She clicked a button. A blue overlay appeared on the map, highlighting specific city blocks. The blue blocks lined up perfectly with the red pins. "What is the blue zone?" Natalie asked. "That," Terence said, "is the proposed route for the new interstate highway bypass. The state hasn't announced it yet, but the route was finalized in a closed-door meeting in the Capitol 4 years ago." Natalie's eyes widened. "The highway. Eminent domain." "Exactly," Terence nodded. "If the state builds the highway, they have to buy the land. If the land is owned by homeowners, the negotiation takes years and costs millions. But if the homeowners are in prison," Natalie finished the thought, horror dawning on her face. "And their assets are seized by the court under civil forfeiture laws." "Then the county owns the land," Terence said. "And who auctions off county-seized land?" "Judge Wycliffe," Natalie whispered. "And who buys it for pennies on the dollar?" Terence clicked a remote. A picture of a sleek, silver-haired man in a suit appeared on the screen. "Meet Julian Thorne, CEO of Golden Hills Development, and Judge Wycliffe's brother-in-law." "They were stealing the neighborhoods," Natalie said, her voice trembling with rage. "They were locking up fathers and sons, evicting grandmothers, stealing entire blocks just to flip the land to the state for a highway." The estimated profit for Golden Hills development was $45 million, Holloway said dryly. Wycliffe's cut was 20%, funneled into offshore accounts in the Caymans. That's why they wanted your grandmother's house, Natalie realized. 104 4th Street. It's right in the middle of the bypass interchange. My grandmother doesn't exist, Terence reminded her gently. The Bureau bought that house specifically to bait Wycliffe. We knew it was the linchpin lot. If they couldn't get that lot, the highway project would stall. We knew Wycliffe would get desperate. And he did, Holloway added. He sent Officer Miller to frame you because you refused to sell. When you resisted, it gave them the excuse to seize the property. Natalie sank into a chair. It's monstrous. It's industrial-scale slavery. It's corruption in its purest form, Terence said. But we needed the link. We knew about the land deals, but we couldn't prove Wycliffe was directing the arrests specifically for the land. We needed him to say it. And he did? Better. Terence grinned. He bragged about it. Terence walked over to a laptop and pressed a key. Audio filled the courtroom. It was crystal clear, recorded from the button on Terence's cuff during a sidebar conference he had overheard, and boosted by the bugs in Wycliffe's chambers. Audio playback. Voice of Wycliffe. I don't care if the evidence is weak, Clifford. The bypass project starts in June. I need that lot on 4th Street. The old woman won't sell. Get her grandson. Plant something. Drugs, guns, I don't give a damn. Just get him off the board so I can sign the forfeiture order. Voice of Banks. It's risky, Harrison. The kid has no priors. Voice of Wycliffe. He's a nobody, Clifford. He's cattle. Who's going to miss him? Just get it done. Julian is breathing down my neck. The recording ended. Natalie looked sick. He called you cattle. He called us all cattle, Terence said, his face hardening. He forgot that cattle stampede. Just then, Agent Ross shouted from the back of the room. Sir, we have a situation at the county jail. Wycliffe is trying to make a call. Let him, Holloway said immediately. Who is he calling? He's dialing the governor's private line, Ross said. Terence laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Of course he is. He thinks he still has friends. Does he? Natalie asked fearfully. The governor appointed him. Holloway smiled, and it was the first time she looked genuinely amused. The governor signed off on this operation 6 months ago. Wycliffe is calling the man who signed his arrest warrant. I want to see him, Terence said suddenly. I want to interrogate him myself. Holloway hesitated. Protocol says we wait for the DOJ team. Protocol didn't sit in that cell for 3 days eating moldy bologna sandwiches, Terence countered. I was the victim. I have the right to face my accuser. Holloway looked at him, then nodded. Make it quick. He's in holding cell 1. The cameras are rolling. Terence grabbed his jacket. He looked at Natalie. You want to come? You're his lawyer of record, technically. Or at least, you represent the victims. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Natalie said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. She looked stronger now. The shock was replaced by a steely resolve. They walked down the marble staircase of the courthouse, past the stunned clerks and the weeping secretaries who were being interviewed by junior agents. They descended into the basement holding area, the air getting cooler and smelling of damp concrete. Officer Davis, the bailiff who had arrested Terence, was now sitting in a cell himself, looking miserable. He looked up as Terence passed. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the floor. They reached the end of the hall. Cell 1. Harrison Wycliffe was sitting on the metal bench. His robe was gone, revealing a sweat-stained white dress shirt and suspenders. He looked smaller without the high bench and the black robe. He looked old. When he saw Terence, he jumped up, rushing to the bars. "Booker!" Agent Booker! Wycliffe pleaded, his voice trembling. Listen to me. We can work this out. I have money. A lot of money. I can make you rich. You and your director. Name your price. Terence stood just out of reach, crossing his arms. He looked at the man who had terrorized a community for 2 decades. You still don't get it, Harrison, Terence said quietly. You think everything is for sale. You think justice is a commodity. Everything is for sale, Wycliffe spat, desperation turning to anger. That's how the world works. Don't look at me like you're a saint. You lied too. You lied to my court. I lied to catch a liar, Terence said. But I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to deliver a message. From who? Wycliffe sneered. The governor? The president? No. Terence stepped closer, his face inches from the bars. From the cattle, he pointed behind him. Natalie stepped into the light. Wycliffe's eyes flicked to her. You, the public defender. You're nobody. I'm the person who is going to lead the class action lawsuit against you, Natalie said, her voice ringing clear and confident. I'm going to represent every single person you wrongfully convicted. I'm going to take your money, your brother-in-law's money, and every cent this county has, and I'm going to give it back to the families you destroyed. Wycliffe gripped the bars, his knuckles white. You can't prove intent on all of them. We have the blue book, Harrison. Terence dropped the hammer. We cracked the safe 10 minutes ago. Wycliffe froze. The fight went out of him. He stumbled back and sat heavily on the bench. He put his head in his hands. It's over, Terence said. The show is over. As they turned to leave, Wycliffe whispered something. What? Terence stopped. I wasn't the only one, Wycliffe mumbled, looking up with a look of pure malice. You think I built this machine alone? You think the DA and I were the top of the food chain? Terence narrowed his eyes. Who else? Wycliffe smiled, a broken, jagged smile. If I go down, I'm taking the senator with me, and the chief of police, and the judge from the Fifth Circuit. Terence looked at Natalie. This was the twist. The rot went deeper than the county. Keep talking. Terence unlocked the cell door and stepped inside, pulling a chair with him. I've got all night, and unlike you, I'm not charging by the hour. The interrogation in the holding cell lasted 3 hours. The air in the basement was stale, recycling the smell of fear and ammonia. But Terence Booker didn't feel the fatigue. He was fueled by a cold, burning rage. Judge Harrison Wycliffe, stripped of his robe and his dignity, sat on the metal cot, weeping intermittently. He had gone from the hangman of Tiburon to a snivelling informant the moment he realized his offshore accounts were frozen. It's not just the highway, Wycliffe stammered, his hands shaking as he held a styrofoam cup of water Terence had given him. The highway is just the artery. It's about the zoning. Senator Sterling, he pushed through a bill last month, the Urban Revitalization Act. It rezones the entire East Ward as commercial mixed use. Terence exchanged a look with Assistant Director Halloway, who was leaning against the cell bars, recording everything on a tablet. Senator Archibald Sterling? Halloway asked, her eyebrows raising. The chairman of the Infrastructure Committee? The same. Wycliffe nodded rapidly. He's the architect. I'm just the janitor. I clear the properties. Banks handles the paperwork. But Sterling, he brings the investors. Foreign money. Shell companies in Panama. They buy the land for nothing after I seize it. Then the state buys it back for the highway at 10 times the value. The profit doesn't go to the state. It goes to Sterling Holdings LLC. Terence paced the small cell. So, you're telling me that the United States Senator for this district is orchestrating a mass displacement of his own constituents to launder foreign money? Yes, Wycliffe cried. And Chief O'Malley, He runs interference. If anyone asks questions, O'Malley intimidates them, or arrests them, or worse. Terence stopped pacing. Worse? Wycliffe looked down. There was a journalist last year, Michael Heston. He was asking about the land deeds. He died in a car accident. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A drunk driving accident, Terence recalled, his memory sharp. O'Malley's department handled the investigation. They said Heston was 3 times over the limit. Heston didn't drink, Wycliffe whispered. He was a Mormon. O'Malley. He fixed it. Terence walked over to the bars and gripped them until his knuckles turned white. This wasn't just corruption anymore. This was a criminal syndicate running a county government. It was murder. We have enough for a RICO case, Halloway said quietly to Terence. But if we move on Wycliffe now, Sterling will catch wind of it. He'll shred everything. He'll be on a private jet to a non-extradition country before the ink dries on the warrant. We need Sterling on tape, Terence said. We need him to admit it. He's too smart. Halloway shook her head. He never talks on the phone. He only meets in person, in his bunker at the estate. Terence turned slowly to look at Wycliffe. The judge shrank back against the wall. Harrison, Terence said, his voice deceptively soft. You want a deal? You want to avoid dying in a federal prison? Yes, Wycliffe breathed. Anything. You're going to call the senator, Terence ordered. You're going to tell him there's a problem with the 4th Street property. Tell him the mechanic. Tell him I'm fighting back. Tell him I hired a high-powered lawyer from New York and we're threatening to expose the zoning scam. Tell him you're panicking. He doesn't like loose ends, Wycliffe swallowed hard. If I tell him I'm panicking, he might send O'Malley to fix me. That's the point, Terence said coldly. You're going to demand an emergency meeting. Tonight. At his estate. You, Banks, O'Malley, and the senator. You tell him you need assurances, or you walk. And what happens to me? Wycliffe asked. You wear a wire, Terence said, and I drive the car. You? Wycliffe looked confused. I'm your new bailiff, Terence said. Since Officer Davis is currently in handcuffs, you hired some private muscle to drive you. That's me. Sterling knows your face. He saw the mug shot. Sterling doesn't look at mug shots of cattle, Terence corrected him. To him, I'm just a face in a file. With a haircut and a suit, I'm just another hired gun. Halloway stepped forward. It's risky, Terence. If they make me. Terence checked his weapon, reholstering it under his jacket. Then the senator gets to meet the FBI a little earlier than planned. 2 hours later, the convoy was moving. Wycliffe sat in the back of a black SUV, sweating profusely. Terence sat in the driver's seat, wearing dark sunglasses and a black tactical turtleneck under a blazer. Beside him sat Agent Ross, posing as another bodyguard. Behind them, in an unmarked van, Halloway and Natalie Reed were listening. Natalie insisted on being there. She needed to hear the truth about the man she had voted for. He agreed to the meeting, Terence said into his comms. ETA to Sterling Estate is 10 minutes. All units, hold positions at the perimeter. Do not breach until I give the signal phrase. What's the signal phrase? Halloway's voice crackled in his ear. Terence looked in the rearview mirror at the terrified judge. The signal is, order in the court. The Sterling Estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion. High iron gates, manicured hedges that cost more than most houses in the East Ward, and security cameras covering every inch of the long, winding driveway. Terence pulled the SUV up to the main portico. 2 private security guards with earpieces stepped forward. Judge Wycliffe to see the senator, Terence said, his voice gravelly. He didn't look at the guards. He stared straight ahead. The guard checked a clipboard. "Go ahead. Park around the side." Terence drove through. He parked, got out, and opened the back door for Wycliffe. "Pull it together," Terence whispered, gripping Wycliffe's elbow hard enough to bruise. "You're a judge. Act arrogant. If you look scared, they'll smell it." Wycliffe nodded, wiping sweat from his upper lip. They walked to the massive oak doors. The doors opened, revealing a butler who led them not to a study, but to the dining room. Inside, the atmosphere was one of celebration, which was jarring given Wycliffe's panic. A long table was set with crystal and silver. Seated at the head was Senator Archibald Sterling. He was a silver fox of a man, 60 years old, with a tan that came from winters in St. Bart's, and a smile that had won 5 elections. To his right sat Chief of Police Patrick O'Malley, a thick-set man with a red face and eyes like beads of glass. To his left was Julian Thorne, the developer. "Harrison," Sterling boomed, raising a glass of scotch. "You're late, and you sound hysterical on the phone. Come, sit. Have a drink. Patrick was just telling us about his new boat." Wycliffe hesitated. Terence and Agent Ross stood by the wall, arms crossed, blending into the background like furniture. Sterling glanced at them briefly, dismissively, then looked back at Wycliffe. I can't drink, Archibald," Wycliffe said, his voice trembling slightly. He sat down but didn't pull his chair in. "We have a problem. The Booker kid." "The mechanic?" Sterling laughed, waving a hand. "The one you sentenced today. I heard you gave him 20 years. Sounds like the problem is solved." "He's appealing," Wycliffe lied, sticking to the script. "He has a lawyer, a sharp one. They're asking for the surveyor reports on the 4th Street lot. They know about the zoning, Archibald. They know about the highway." Chief O'Malley stopped chewing his steak. He slowly put his knife and fork down. "How do they know that, Harrison? The only people who know about the zoning are in this room." "I don't know." Wycliffe's panic was real now, which made his performance convincing. "Maybe there's a leak. Maybe one of your clerks talked, Julian." Julian Thorne looked offended. "My people are loyal. We pay them enough to be." "Relax, Harrison," Senator Sterling said, his voice dropping to a soothing, dangerous baritone. "So what if they know? Who are they going to tell?" "The police." He gestured to O'Malley. "The courts?" He pointed at Wycliffe. "The press? I own the 2 biggest papers in the state." "This feels different," Wycliffe insisted. "This lawyer? She's talking about federal oversight. She's talking about the FBI." At the mention of the FBI, the room went silent. Sterling stood up slowly. He walked over to the window, looking out at his sprawling grounds. "The FBI doesn't care about a mechanic in Tiburon County, Harrison. You're losing your nerve. You've been on the bench too long. Maybe it's time you retired." "Retired?" Wycliffe squeaked. "Permanently," O'Malley grunted, reaching for his wine. "Go to an island, or go somewhere else." The threat hung in the air. "I can't just leave," Wycliffe shouted, playing his part perfectly. "I need my share. The 4th Street sale closes next week. That's $5 million. I'm not walking away without my money." Sterling turned around. His face was no longer the smiling politician. It was a mask of cold indifference. "You'll get what we give you, Harrison. You're a liability. You botched the frame-up. You made a scene in the courtroom. We heard about the civil rights. Wow, speech you gave. Sloppy." "I did what you told me to do," Wycliffe yelled. "I framed him to get the land. I framed the last 10 of them. I ruined their lives so you could build your strip malls." "Keep your voice down," Sterling hissed. "Yes, we ruined them. Because they were in the way of progress. They are collateral damage. Do you think the Romans built the aqueducts without crushing a few bugs? So that's what we are?" The voice didn't come from Wycliffe. It came from the bodyguard by the wall. Sterling turned, annoyed. "Excuse me, did the help just speak?" Terence Booker stepped out of the shadows. He took off his sunglasses. He unbuttoned his blazer. "I said," Terence repeated, walking toward the table. "Is that what we are? Bugs? Collateral damage?" O'Malley stood up, his hand going to his hip where his service weapon was holstered. "Who the hell are you?" Terence looked at the chief. "Sit down, Patrick, unless you want to add assault on a federal agent to your murder charge for Michael Heston." O'Malley froze. "What did you say?" Sterling's eyes narrowed. He looked at Terence's face, really looked at it. "I know you," Sterling whispered. "I saw the file. You're the defendant. You're Booker." "That's right," Terence said, stopping at the end of the table. "I'm the mechanic. I'm the nobody. I'm the cattle." "How did you get in here?" Sterling demanded, looking at Wycliffe. "Harrison, what have you done?" "He did the right thing for the first time in his life," Terence said. He tapped the lapel of his jacket. "Did you get all that, Director?" "Loud and clear." Holloway's voice boomed from the hidden speakers in Terence's earpiece, which he pulled out and dropped on the table. "Order in the court," Terence said calmly. Crash. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining room shattered inward. Flashbang grenades rolled across the Persian rugs. Bang! Bang! The room filled with blinding white light and a deafening ringing sound. "FBI, get on the ground, now!" Dozens of agents in tactical gear swarmed through the broken windows and the main doors. Laser sights danced across the room, painting red dots on the senator's silk suit, the chief's chest, and the developer's forehead. Chief O'Malley tried to draw his gun. Terence was faster. In one fluid motion, he vaulted over the corner of the table and kicked the gun out of O'Malley's hand. He grabbed the chief by the back of the neck and slammed his face into the fine china, sending gravy and porcelain flying. "Don't even think about it," Terence growled. Senator Sterling stood frozen, his hands half raised, his face a mask of shock. "Do you know who I am? I am a United States Senator. You can't touch me. This is a violation of the Constitution." Holloway walked in through the broken doors, stepping over the glass. She held up a warrant. "Actually, Senator," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "the Constitution is exactly what we're using to arrest you. Conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, accessory to murder, and violation of the RICO Act." Agents moved in, spinning Sterling around and cuffing him. The metal clicked shut. "You're making a mistake," Sterling screamed as he was hauled away. "I am untouchable. I am the system." Terence walked over to the senator. He leaned in close. "No, Senator," Terence said, his voice low and hard. "You're just a defendant." He looked around the room. Wycliffe was being cuffed again. Thorne was weeping on the floor. O'Malley was unconscious. The table was destroyed. It was total devastation for the Tiburon elite. Natalie Reed walked in behind the agents. She looked at the wreckage of the dinner party. She looked at the powerful men being dragged out like common criminals. She walked up to Terence, who was straightening his jacket. "You okay?" she asked. Terence looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. "Not yet," he said. "We caught the wolves. Now we have to free the sheep." The fallout was nuclear. The raid on the Sterling estate dominated the national news cycle for weeks. The footage of a sitting U.S. senator being led away in handcuffs, screaming about the Constitution, was played on every channel from CNN to Fox News. But it was the Blue Book, Judge Wycliffe's meticulous ledger of bribes and framed defendants, that truly dismantled the machine. 3 months later, the Tiburon County Courthouse looked the same on the outside, but inside the air had changed. The smell of stale fear was gone, replaced by the frenetic energy of reform. Courtroom 4B was packed again, but this time Harrison Wycliffe wasn't on the bench. He was at the defendant's table, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too small. Presiding over the case was a special federal magistrate brought in from D.C. to ensure neutrality. Harrison Wycliffe, the magistrate read from the file, for your role in the conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights, for racketeering, and for 6 counts of judicial misconduct, you are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel came down. It wasn't a sharp crack like Wycliffe's used to be. It was a heavy, final thud. Wycliffe didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just stared at the floor, a broken man who had realized too late that power borrowed from corruption always comes with high interest. Senator Sterling received 30 years. Chief O'Malley got 25, but the real victory wasn't the sentences. It was what happened afterward. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining on the steps where a massive crowd had gathered. They weren't protesters anymore. They were families. The heavy oak doors opened, and a stream of people began to walk out. These were the red pins on the map, the men and women Wycliffe had wrongfully imprisoned to clear the land for the highway. Terence Booker stood by his car at the curb, leaning against the hood. He watched as a young man, no older than 20, ran down the steps into the arms of his weeping mother. "We did that," a voice said beside him. Terence turned to see Natalie Reed. She looked different. She was wearing a tailored suit, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had just won the biggest class-action lawsuit in state history. "You did that," Terence corrected her. "I just opened the door. You're the one who has to walk them through it. The governor appointed me interim district attorney this morning." Natalie smiled, shielding her eyes from the sun. "My first act was to dismiss all pending cases from Officer Miller's arrests. And the highway project? It's dead. The land is being returned to the homeowners." "Good," Terence nodded. "Tiburon needs a sheepdog. The wolves are gone, but they always come back." "Where will you go?" Natalie asked. "Back to D.C. Wherever the Bureau sends me," Terence said, opening his car door. "There are a lot of Judge Wycliffes out there. A lot of towns where the badge is just a license to steal." He paused, looking at the scar on his wrist where the handcuffs had been. "You know, for a minute there in the cell," Terence admitted, "I thought he had me. I thought the system was too big to break." "The system is just people, Terence," Natalie said. "Sometimes it's bad people. But as long as there are people like you willing to get their hands dirty, there's hope." Terence smiled, a genuine, rare smile. He got into the car and started the engine. He rolled down the window one last time. "Keep fighting, counselor. Stay safe, agent." Terence pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic. In his rearview mirror, he saw the courthouse shrinking. He saw the families hugging. He saw justice, not as an abstract concept, but as a real, tangible thing. He adjusted his sunglasses, turned up the radio, and drove on. The case was closed, but the work never ended. And that is the story of how one brave agent and a determined lawyer brought down an entire empire of corruption. It's a terrifying reminder that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect the law are the ones breaking it. But it's also a reminder that the truth, no matter how deep it's buried, eventually comes to light. Judge Wycliffe thought he was untouchable because of his title. Senator Sterling thought his money made him a god. But they forgot the most important rule of nature. Even the biggest predators can fall if they underestimate their prey. What would you have done if you were in Natalie's shoes? Would you have taken the plea deal or fought for the truth? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends to help the channel grow, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.